Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to DriveTime, the all-new podcast series that I've created, mainly because most of the time we are in our car. So I've decided to call this DriveTime. So whether you are listening to it in the car or you've got the ability to view this as well, we're sort of changing this up a bit. If you're in the auditory version, fantastic, but we've also got the visual version. We're going to do this a little bit different. So we're recording this live, so all of you can actually review this and even show it to your team, which I think is going to be a really important one to kick off this educational podcast series. Now, I need to thank our supporters, professional partners, education, a really important one, and our major partner, Hall Chadwick, and our other supporters being Profit Master, iKeep, Corporate Lifeline, and Lloyd's Auctioneers. Now, we're going to kick this series off with a really, really important topic to talk about. And over the last couple of years, I've been working with some key figures. We've brought these guys onto a couple of different shows that I've run. We've run the podcast series. They are people that are working within the accounting industry as well. So I've got two guys that I'll introduce very shortly that will be sharing their knowledge with you. And I think that's a really important factor. Stories, knowledge, ideas, what to do, what not to do. All of this is going to be a part of a bit of a framework that we're going to put together for ideally talk about how you can establish a business advisory division as a service offering. And I think that's really important. We're probably going to kick this off over two parts as well. So there will be series one, series two, part one, part two, if you may, because it'll probably run for about 60 minutes. So we're going to break it up 30 minutes and 30 minutes. So you've got the ability to have two sessions there as well. What we want to do is we want to break down this, let's call it this advisory section that we talk about, advisory offering. I think from the polls we ran last year, from the feedback we took from a lot of the different accounting firms out there, it was, how do we not sell the service? How do we develop greater confidence in turning this into a true service offering? They're the sorts of things that we want to bring out. So it's not about selling the service. How do we price the service? How do we do all this? It's all a part of a sales process. But we're going to take you away from that, and we're going to work out and provide you with information of how you can just start conversations with clients. I also want to bring the topic up because yesterday I had a chat to, obviously, our friends at Hall Chadwick, had a really good chat to people at Hall Chadwick about the type of, let's call it the pre-insolvency work that they do, and the work that, yes, there's insolvency, there's pre-insolvency, that there's liquidation, but no one ever wants clients or SMEs to go down that road because it's fair to say it's too late. So it's really important to start these conversations early, that you can capture them. So therefore, ideally stop the clients from getting into that situation, and therefore assisting them to build a bigger and better, more profitable business. So what I'm going to do is, let me stop sharing my screen first of all, and then let me introduce you to our two guests. And I think that's really important. So let me introduce you to my guest for this DriveTime podcast series, Eddie Senatore, also known as Ted. You got that nickname last year and it's just stuck, hasn't it, Ted?
Indeed it has.
And Warwick Cavill, welcome, mate. Welcome to DriveTime, lads.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Now, again, just to set the scene, again, I'm going to go through quite a lot, so stick with us. And I think to set the scene here in building a valuable business advisory division, and I know there's going to be firms of you out there that are currently doing it. There's going to be firms that don't know where to start. There's going to be firms that are doing it that are probably stuck in terms of, I'm doing it, but am I doing it well enough? Do I have the capacity? How do I get off the tools to offer these services? Because these are fairly important. We're going to break all that down. So I think probably what I'll do is to talk about the benefits. I want to talk about the benefits first before we get into the detail. Eddie, I might throw to you first, mate. And you might give us a bit of background on yourself as well for people that haven't met you or haven't been a part of our sessions before. But also, what's your top 5 benefits that people could take away? Now, that could be 3, it could be 5.
Yeah. So these are benefits in terms of the accounting practice doing the advisory piece.
Yep, and so, to the client as well.
Yeah. So my background is 30 odd years, or I should say 30 years or thereabouts, as opposed to 30 odd years in the insolvency space, and more particularly in the last sort of half a decade to a decade. I wouldn't say that pre-insolvency space, but doing the turnaround or workout, change management, more broadly defined, and that's led to a natural progression to the advisory piece, particularly with the change in legislation over the last so many years in terms of the safe harbour provisioning, where directors can claim safe harbour or defence to insolvency, some insolvency offences. But what I like particularly about the advisory piece is the control that you have. You're in control of your environment. More particularly, you're in control of your time and how you spend that and how you allocate that with clients. You're not linked to a program. And the work that you do is not specifically guarded by regulators. So it's a free-flowing piece and exchange between you as an advisor and the client. And that's what I think is most valuable about that. Apart from the obvious reasons that broadening the revenue base, it does drive better engagement with clients, and it also drives better engagement with the people in your business that you're working with. So staff are no longer just crunching numbers for the sake of crunching the numbers. And I'll get into the piece about, what are the numbers about? They're telling stories, and it's those stories that we need to have conversations about. And the other two elements that I like about the advisory piece is it's impactful. It's impactful because you're talking about current, real, contemporary issues facing the business owner. The track record is the track record. The numbers, the business numbers, gives us confidence that the operator knows, the business owner knows how to drive a business. But the fact that it's the contemporary issues, they're real, they're current, and they're impactful is that's what I'd say to be the top motivators for the advisory space from my perspective.
Thank you. Well said. And Warwick, what about yourself?
Oh, what he said.
That's too easy.
That's easy, isn't it?
I think Eddie summarised it pretty well, and I think that to me, just to sort of capture some of that, was to one is that obviously from a revenue perspective, I mean, you've got existing clients, and to increases, you can get quite rapid increases in revenue. It's also, to me, the key driver to me is value. So you become a person of much higher value and influence with a client, a go-to person. It's far more rewarding work and enjoyable work, which means there are benefits in attracting and retaining staff because you're doing much better quality work, and you are having a much bigger impact on the client. And you're seeing that go through, and the relationship with the client becomes far deeper as a result of that. So client retention, all those sorts of things are huge benefits. So that it's hard to overstate the benefits of going down this path when compared to other services that you could be offering. And I pick up on Eddie's point too. Talking to accounting practices, they're sort of so focused on financial planning, and I'm saying, but you're the trusted advisor in the business advisory space. There is no regulatory or hardly any regulatory requirements to operate in that space. You are the most trusted advisor, and you have almost no competition. Why would you spend time, in the financial planning where there's big competition, high regulation, high costs to operate in that space to keep your qualifications up and so on? I'm saying, well, to me, the small business space is a natural winner. It's a lay down misere almost for the accountant. The most trusted advisor repeatedly in surveys comes out as being the accountant in the business space. So to me, all those reasons or all those benefits to me set this up as a primary, strategically. If I look at it as a strategic planner, I'll be saying, well, what more do you want to move into this space? What more boxes could it possibly tick?
Well, it's an interesting comment, because I feel, and this is probably where it's good, and we're going to get plenty of feedback, I've got no doubt, when this goes live out to everybody. And given the coaching experience that I've had, and sort of Eddie and yourself, Warwick, you've been in that coaching consulting as well with a lot of accounting firms over the years. Ted just mentioned 35 years. Didn't think you were that young, mate.
I started early, let's say that.
But one of the critical factors that you mentioned, sort of, Warwick, was you've got existing clients. I know a lot of firms go out there, one, to chase new clients, and we know the cost that is associated with chasing new clients as opposed to servicing the existing clients. Sort of number two as well is, one of the things you just mentioned there was when you're actually dealing in this space, and sometimes the reason why firms go to financial planning, just to cover this off a little bit, is that it's extended as well. They can bring in a financial planner to offer the service. There's not a lot of their time. They can't give the advice. They don't have the capacity to do that. So when they are working at arm's length with someone, it's still about offering the client the service, which is then going to obviously benefit them from a retirement or planning for retirement stage of their life. So, and that's some of the key things we're going to break down as well, because I know you know, sort of talking off edge before, you mentioned something similar to that where you've been engaged by a firm that wants to offer it. Maybe you might want to share that now with them.
Yeah, I mean, I should clarify my point. I'm not saying don't do financial planning. I'm just saying if you're going to look for markets where you've got the biggest opportunity, to me, I would be putting business advisory first, because of your natural advantages in that space, and it's a low cost. You know, and with existing clients, you're already known, liked, you know, and trusted in that space. And how do you get access to new clients? It's often through existing clients. So the growth is there because the new clients don't know necessarily like or trust you at this particular point in time. So to me, that there's a number of things there. But getting back to your question is that some accountants, you know, and my goal is really to help accountants grow their value and their average fee per client faster in the business advisory space. So how do we do that? Well, one way is to train the accountant and mentor and coach and work with the accountant through that process. Another way, you know, an accountant recently, and I've had this done a few times, said to me, Warwick, we just don't have the time. We're just absolutely smashed on compliance work, but we don't want to lose our good clients because we're not providing that service. So this particular practice, a four-partner practice, referred me into one of their major clients. And so I worked with the client, and then I turned around and said to the client, well, you've got three key advisors that you're using. There's myself, there's your accountant, and there's your financial planner. So I'm a bit concerned that if you approach them and work with them individually, yes, there are times when you need to do that, but there's a chance for miscommunication. So why don't we form an advisory board, meet once a quarter, and we could, you know, have all three advisors in the room together. And the client was just over the moon with that. So we've had held a couple of those now, which have been tremendously powerful for the client. But the other side of it is the accountant sits in on those meetings as well. And I'm saying to the accountant, well, watch what I do. And that's a way of getting free training. You sit in on this, because in a couple of years' time, I'm going to be turning around to you and saying, you've got to now run these sorts of things yourself. So there's a number of different ways to skin a cat. So there are ways that you can do it that way. Yeah.
Brilliant. And look, I feel with the way that the last 2 years is going to, again, I read something from the guys at Hall Chadwick, sort of one of our directors, talking about it only recently, that, you know, that there's been 50,000 director penalty notices that have gone out to businesses. Okay. So the ATO is stepping up any sort of outstanding debts, let's call it. Then I also saw something also across the internal wire that where there's, you know, there was 193 companies that closed last week because of the fact that they have defaulted on their penalty notices, and now the ATO is starting to take action against any sort of outstanding debt. So these are even more critical times. We think that the last 2 years the ATO haven't done anything, but if anything, it's time they're going to step up. They know that they've got money that needs to come in. So this is there's not a more better time to actually put capacity into what we're talking about. It's probably fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 50,000 warning notices the tax office sent out. It's usually sparks clients into actions when those threats come across the desk, because until then there's no real need for change. And I think the COVID excuse will only take us so far, although I still think that the COVID has provided some wonderful opportunities, and a lot of the business people out there haven't taken those opportunities. And I think advisors to those business, particularly accountants, haven't seen those opportunities to take advisory and work with the clients coming out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because even this morning, though, you know, they were talking about, and I think a lot of them was in the building and construction industry, which is unfair. But even I saw this morning on the news, they were talking about that there's a lot of good companies out there, but because they can't get materials in for the company, into the country, they can't actually complete the work.
Mm.
And because of those cost of materials are going up by 30-40%, again, they can't get materials in and the costs are going up, and obviously who pays at the end? The end consumer. So it's an interesting one that we're going to, again, have to battle with. So businesses are going to have these compounded issues over the last 2 years to continue to deal with.
Yeah, I agree, Paul, and I think that, but beyond that, I mean, can I suggest to you, probably sort of a bit rudely, but can I suggest that many of the clients have been calling out for assistance for years. It's just that most accountants are just not reading the tea leaves. They're not getting the message because of their focus. So to me, there's been, you know, accounting practice, businesses, small businesses have been actually seeking, and there's been lots of surveys that have shown this, that the small business market are really looking for better advice, different advice. But yet when you go and talk to the accountant, they'll say, oh, my clients won't pay for this. They won't do this. And I'm saying, no, rubbish. You're having the wrong conversation. That's the problem. It's not that there's a lack of demand. It's just that you're not picking up the leads. You're not, you know, no one's going to walk into you and sort of say, well, can you do this for me? And it's a packaged up, you know, oh yeah, I can do that. It's a nice little service. I don't walk into my doctor and say, look, I want an appendectomy. I walk in there and say, I've got a pain in the stomach. You've got to work out what I need. And so to me, it's sort of, it doesn't come as a neat package. You've got to read the tea leaves. You've got to listen to the conversation, and you've got to understand what's really driving the problems in the client. And that's been going on for years, but we're just not listening in a way that really picks up on this would be my comment.
Mate, could I pick up on that for a second? Pick up on your tea leaves, your Dr. Tea Leaves, because I actually like that. Let's, and look, to everyone watching and listening, this is about, ideally, again, professional partners education is about providing an educational platform. So we want this to be a learning platform for all of you that are here. So we ideally want to provide you with a framework. We're going to share some things that probably what not to do, but more importantly, what to do, because it's all about being the proactive person that can start doing things, especially with the new financial year approaching as well. So you got planning, sit down, work through it. What are we going to do, knowing all these things are going to happen? So don't be reactive, be proactive. And they're the key things we want to share today. So picking up your Dr. Tea Leaves, let's work through that a little bit, Warwick, because I think that's a really, really good metaphor to work through, I suppose, in terms of just, you go to your doctor 100% and you go to them for a reason, you got a pain in the guts. Let's work through that again, because this is where I suppose maybe the people listening to this can say, yeah, you're right. What you don't know, but it's about, I've heard you talk about this before, so I'm not going to steal your thunder, but maybe give everyone a bit of an idea of how your mindset's working from that perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess from my perspective, the first thing is to start where the client is, right? So I get very frustrated with the way the accounting market goes about business advisory at the moment. I think it's just, and I think that as a result of that, clients are coming back and saying, we're not prepared to pay for this. So, and we don't want this. And no, they don't want what being presented to them. So the model that we use today is we find a solution and then we go looking for a problem. So look, let's get a financial health check. Let's go and do, and so, but the client doesn't want a financial health check, right? You're starting with the solution and walking in and saying, well, let's do it. No, I just walk in and sit down and say, how's business? Let's start talking about your business. You start to open up and tell me more about your business. Then I start to pick up the cues. And it may end up that we end up doing a financial health check, but that's not the starting point. And I don't want to start with a product. I want to start with where the client's at. Tell me about your business. What are the biggest issues in the business at the moment? What are the challenges you're facing? How are you facing those challenges? What are other options you might be able to, and I'm getting the client to think and engaging the client rather than walking in with a packaged software or something like that. The packaged software works really well for the software company that's selling it, but really doesn't work very well for the client, nor does it work particularly well for the accountant. And, I was speaking to an accountant, he's raving on about how good this software was. And I looked at the software and said, yeah, it's very good. It's excellent. And I said, really is a good service. But I said, how are you going with it? He said, I've been using it for about 2.5 years. And I said, well, how many clients have you got on it? And he said, 2. I said, you're kidding me. Oh, but I'm about to get a 3rd. And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. If that's all you're doing, then, go off fishing, do something else.
And unfortunately, if we go back to our years of experience, that's their little comfort blanket. I've got 3 boys and 2 of them have grown out of them, but the 3rd one, the youngest one, has still got a little blanket that it gives them the comfort of going with a product as opposed to having the confidence to have a conversation. And it's a bit like going to your doctor. I was at the doctor only last week, and you go in there for one thing, and what does he do? He asked me a whole series of different questions. Then suddenly I'm off to go and get some blood tests.
Yeah.
And then they give him results to then again. But it's about asking questions, and that's what we're going to break down today.
So to me, a trusted advisor should never be selling. And if you find yourself in a position where you're selling, you're clearly having the wrong conversation. You've got yourself to a point where you shouldn't be. And that's the problem. But we're told so much stuff about this is the way to sell, this is the way, and that's just not, I just don't think a trusted advisor should be selling. I think it's about, enabling the client to buy, and that's a completely different conversation.
Well, this is all sort of fascinating conversation and discussion, and it's a case, I guess, of if you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And if you've been trained as an accountant and you've got debits and credits, then it's all going to be within that framework. And we get used to that logic that there's a program and that we need to deliver something, and some new software comes along, and Practice Ignition does all our engagement letters. What do we need here for business advisory? Just to throw panic out there is that business advisory is what you make it, and it is not structured like you're punching out a P&L and balance sheet. And a lot of accountants probably don't like that framework doesn't exist. Really, it does come down to having the conversation, as Warwick says, being a trusted advisor. It should just flow naturally. And if you take it naturally and give it its time, you will find that the advisory piece will naturally flow from it.
You made me think about something there, and you're spot on. And you just, I'm a part of a network, and twice a year, well, not during COVID we didn't, but twice a year we run a conference. And in that conference, it's an accountants conference. And in that conference, only small, relatively small numbers, up to 25, 30 people attending. And so what we do in that conference is it's a 2-day conference, and we get a real client to come in, right? And the client, we do some work on that client beforehand to get their background, their story, their backstory, and we send that out to all the accountants that are attending. And it's just a 2 or 3 pager to give you an idea what industry they're in, what sort of doing, what success they've had, and so on. And then the idea is over those 2 days is to work out a way to help that client. And we do this by doing interviews. So the people, the floor then asks the client about their business and stuff like that. And so the whole idea is to work them through and to talk about business advisory. And we've had to change it around, because every time we've had the accountants interviewing the client, guess what they ask them about? They ask them about, is it a trust? Is it a company? Come on, guys, this is not business advisory. Is it when was the last BAS payment? What software, accounting software do you use? And so we're doing it a different way now, because we find that the accountant's just the go-to, as Eddie was saying. The whole go-to strategy is to talk about those types of things, and the conversation doesn't branch out beyond that. And the client, that's not really helping the client. There's a quote in one of the surveys: find an accountant that helps you design the future, not one that writes up history. And all the questions are all about writing up history. It's not about designing the future. So how many accountants are actually helping their clients design the future? That's what business advisory is to me.
Yeah, and that's the introductory comments I was making, was that one of the benefits is it's impactful.
Yep.
And if you have a serious impact on the client, that is go to sell advisory for you to other people they talk to. It's hard to sell a P&L, but if you're having an impact, they'll talk about that.
Very true, very true. So let's stay on that for a second, Eddie. Let's talk about the number one most important skill to be able to do this, because we've just spoken about, you know, the ability not to. And to be fair, I know there's a lot of conferences on right now. There's a Zero road show on right now. There's going to be a lot of people trying to sell people software, framework, whatever it may be, health checks. So what do you feel is the number one most important skill to create an advisory service?
From my perspective, it's about being patient and just listening to the obvious comments. Oh, cash flow's tight. Is just listening. Or, you know, what's that really mean? And just letting the client keep talking and just trying to hear what they're saying, not necessarily just cash flow's tight. I mean, why is that? What's driving that? And that listening skill will be able to take you down the advisory path very quickly. It's hard. It's not something that comes naturally in terms of, you know, really active listening with a view to servicing someone. So that would be the number one skill I'd be focusing on.
Okay, so and look, it's a good one. So, for example, Warwick, when we talk about this and those skills and the listening skills, and they, you know, people often say, from a salesperson's point of view, the number one sales engagement tool is to listen. So you need to ask good questions. And I suppose as kids, having 3 young ones, they're always very good at asking questions, because by delving deeper and delving deeper and delving deeper, you find the answer. But getting back to, can those skills be taught? Or should we be recognizing, let's say, strengths and weaknesses and be bringing in an expert? What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. I agree 100% with what Eddie said. Step one is listening skills. Step two, to me, is really having a different conversation. So being comfortable and understanding how you create value. So stepping outside of the role of having to be the expert, right? Because the client is often the expert in their business, you're not. So if we're listening to solve the problem, we're going to listen in a different way. If we're listening to co-create a solution with the client, so either if you're my client, Paul, if I'm listening to find a solution, I find the problem, now I've got to give a solution. That's a different way of listening than if we're working together and we're co-creating solutions. So one of the things I think we need to move away from is this, well, not move away from, but add to what we've already got, is the ability to co-create solutions with clients, not to provide solutions for clients. Sometimes a client can actually, with your guidance and facilitation, can actually create very powerful solutions that they couldn't have created on their own. Can we teach it? Absolutely. But the biggest single blockage, and I think that's what you're getting to, is that it's like breaking a habit. It's very hard to do. It's not that the concepts that Eddie and I are talking about are complex. It's what the complex bit is breaking the old habits. And that's the key. And I talk to accountants who just cannot get the idea that you don't need to be the expert in the room. In fact, you can actually add more value by facilitating the conversation and drawing out from the client and maybe others in the room if they're there, and co-creating the solution. And that's where you don't get the fee resistance, all those sorts of things. You're not selling a product. You're actually communicating or you're helping the client to move towards their vision. Because when you say, look, I'm not selling, nobody wants a service. It's not like I'm buying a Porsche or a fridge or a TV, or I want those things. I don't actually want your service. I don't lay awake at night time saying, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have an insurance policy, or wouldn't it be nice to have a tax return done? I don't want those services. What I want is the benefits that flow from that. And the benefit that flows from that is myself sometime in the future who is better off. I want to be better off. So that's what the client's buying. They're buying their better off self. They're not actually buying your service at all, right? And so if we go in there trying to sell a service, we're missing the point. Nobody wants it.
Geez, some powerful messages there. So again, this is the beauty of having these sorts of sessions where you can obviously go back and take back that last 5 minutes and go through that again, because there's some powerful messages and what I'd call golden nuggets that all of you could take away. So let's try and run this through a little bit of a, let's call it a, I don't know, what can we call it? Like a workshop. Let's try and workshop this as best we can. I'm new to this. I've set up my accounting firm. I'm turning over 600,000 a year. I'm doing okay. Where do I start? Do I start with the client list? How do I set up the meeting? Do I tell the client that this is a complimentary meeting? What do you suggest I do?
For me, I have a fundamental rule. Start with the expected and move to the unexpected, or start with the known and move to the unknown. So what I mean by that, so what does the client expect? So I don't have to set up, I don't recommend you go in there and say, oh, look, we're going to hold a business advisory meeting. That's not natural. So no. I'm already going to have a meeting with my client to talk about compliance work, right? And compliance work fits into the picture. It's an important part. It is value adding, but it's just not enough on its own, right? Far from enough on its own. So I will go in there with the expected. So I will talk to my client. So look, can we catch up? Let's run through a few things, a bit of tax planning, and I'll use that entree. Then having the expected conversation, then I'll move to the unexpected. Does that make sense to you? So to me, I would never, oh, look, I want to let's set up a special meeting just to talk about business advisory. Well, why do I, as a client, why would I want to be part of that? You're just going to sell me something, So to me, it's always starting where the client expects or where the client feels comfortable and you feel comfortable, and then move into the other space. So that would be my, and you got a client meeting next week. So let's go and do it. Let's not go and spend, $20,000 on a piece of software, then spend 3 months learning the software, and then put ourselves in a position we've now got to sell that software to the client. So 6 or 8 months down the track, that's the model that we're using at the moment. We may or may not get a sale. I got a conversation tomorrow with a client. So let's sit down and talk about that conversation. How do we get the best value out of that conversation, starting with the expected and moving to the unexpected?
I like that. I like the expected and moving into the unexpected, because it's a fairly simple flow that and if you've already got a meeting in place, let's talk about all the things that there's a few other things I'd love to just have a quick chat to you. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Or even not asking if whether it's okay. Eddie's point before is just sort of saying, our cash flows tight. Oh, what's causing that? Oh, my business partner is, spending all the money. Okay, where's that coming from? How long has that been going on for? So there's a whole range of things that would fall out of that, just out of the questioning. But it's picking up on those little gems that the client will drop all the way through the conversation. And that's where listening that Eddie was talking about before comes in. You've got to listen for those key points. And there are things that you're listening for that you can pick up on. Even I listen to things like repeated words that obviously have a significance to the client, or things like I can never, or we always, okay, tell me more about that, because often those sorts of things are hiding really big problems in the organization.
Yeah, I think if you go into a meeting saying I want to talk to you about business advisory services, I think you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. Yeah. And I think it could also backfire from a client's perspective. Said, the client might go home and have a conversation with their partner saying, the accountant called me and wanted to have a chat about some advisory. It's a bit peculiar, actually, because it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't flow naturally. You've got to learn what Warwick's talking about. You've got to be able to get comfortable with an evolving background, an evolving conversation. And I guess it kind of comes naturally to me because of doing insolvency for such a long time. You see clients, we don't have recurring clients. They come in and say, I've got this problem, this is the problem, and you're trying to piece everything together whilst you're having a conversation. And I think that natural flow is much better than putting this undue and unnecessary pressure on yourself to say, well, let's have a conversation about advisory. You've always got to listen for those key introductions that allow you to change direction or pivot. And my classic is always starting with a really open-ended question. And I don't know where it leads, because it could go onto a personal platform or a business platform, but how are things? When you're talking about me personally or the business? And more often than not, people will say, I've had a lot of experience with this, and I generally get more than 50% coming back saying things like, "Oh, things aren't like they used to be," and that's what you want. So, what do you mean, personally or business? What do you mean? What's different?
Yeah.
Oh, and that's just going to open up so many avenues for you to travel down, just because you started with an openness. So, how things.
And if someone says it's a little bit like, I don't know, I sort of bring it back to the "Are you okay?" Sort of slogan, when it comes to mental health, and you call up a few mates and you ask them how they are, they're going, "Yeah, I'm great," or "Yeah, I'm okay." Well, it's the next question, isn't it? It's not just sort of just waiting, going, "Oh, well, that sounds like you're in a good space. Why is that?" You can always go that next one, and then they'll explain, and they'll go, "Well, actually, I'm okay, but I'm not that great."
Yep.
Okay, bang. So tell me about that.
Yeah, that's right.
We've probably got about 4 or 5 of our mates that we do this sort of once a month, and certainly in the last 2 years we've tapped into just doing that and just making sure we're connecting. And it's amazing how much information gets shared, and you go, "Shit, I didn't know about that."
That's right. And if people aren't saying to me, "Oh, things aren't like they used to be," it's like, okay, and that's the entree for me to say, just okay. It's not great or good. What's great or good look for you? And you're off.
And the point is, and what Eddie's saying, what you're saying, Paul, the point is you don't need much to get that entree. It's just an inflection. It's just something really quite small. And that's why that listening that Eddie's talking about is so important, because it's not that great anymore. It's not as good as it used to be. Well, how was it previously? Why isn't it, what's changed and all those? There's a whole wardrobe of questions you can roll out now, and it's going to take you, who knows the direction that's going to go in. But the thing is, if I'm sitting here thinking that, geez, I've got to come up, I'm too afraid to ask the question because I've got to come up with the answer, then you're missing the point. And that's the bit that where they fall down, because I don't have to come up with the answer. I have to come up with the question that helps us together co-create the answer. Well, it's not even an answer at times, because Eddie and I have spoken before about adaptive challenges, and with an adaptive challenges, sometimes you cannot find a solution to some complex problems and human problems. What you're looking for is to create the next adaptive move. So we sit down and we work with the client to find what's the next adaptive move that we can do that the client's really comfortable and enthusiastic about doing. Once we've done that, we come back and do it again and again, and we move slowly towards a solution rather than jumping towards an answer, if you know what I mean. And that's not an expert conversation. That's a facilitative conversation.
Yeah, it's an important one, isn't it? Because there's a very, very big difference between what you just explained then, because 9 times out of 10, and I think this is probably a male thing as well, that we're looking for solutions.
Yeah.
When actually in this scenario, we're not.
And all our training goes into that's what a profession is. I have the answer, you have the problem. And I'm saying, okay, that's a very limited, if that's the mode that you're stuck in, you're going to really struggle in business advisory.
Yeah, that's right. I'd have to agree with that.
So let's say we get to the end of the conversation or the meeting, and I've written it down here. We talk about the expected, then we talk about the unexpected. How do we close that meeting? Is that something that, again, because I know, because we did this last year quite a bit, and a lot of the firms were asking, do I talk about fees? Do I talk about what do I talk about? And I think that can be quite an awkward position for the practitioner to how do we finish up the meeting?
Eddie, you want to?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, because you're not in the situation and the circumstances. It would probably flow a bit more naturally for me to answer that question if I was engaged in that type of conversation. And it depends how the meeting ends, but one thing I wouldn't walk.
Oh, we've just lost sound, Eddie.
One thing I'd walk out of that meeting with is another meeting. That's the one bottom thing you want is another meeting booked in, ready to go.
Yep.
Right? So you're not going to close off without.
Advance, don't you, Eddie? You need, before you walk into the meeting, what's your advance out that you want out of this meeting? And it may not be a sale. It may be another meeting or something else. But be very clear what you're looking for.
Yeah. So that's the bottom line. You're still on a winner if you can keep that conversation going, because it allows you to digest and allows the client to digest and start thinking about these adaptive moves that Warwick's talking about. Not necessarily trying to find the solution, but at least setting up the next meeting to have more fluid discussion about the issues.
So about making sure that the client has got value out of it?
Articulating
value?
What, beg your pardon?
The actual meeting itself. So making sure that, you know, one of the key things is, so we're about articulating the value.
Yeah, like, I think the value just flows naturally, and the client will keep coming back if they get value, right? They will. If we need to book another meeting and have a continue that conversation, they say, yeah, let's do that, then you know you're creating value. If they want to take a rain check and not firm something up, then you probably haven't provided the value they were expecting. That would be my reaction. In terms of closing off, if the conversation was fluid, I would be then engaging in business, like business advisory is something that we offer here, and it seems like it's something that you're engaging comfortably in. You know, would you be curious to explore what that looks like? And you know, if you really wanted to get something concrete into an engagement letter piece, you could be that forward, I guess.
I look at it, I mean, I agree with what Eddie's saying. It's hard to do it because you're out of context, you know, but in a context. Yeah. But as a general principle, I work through 3 phases, or probably there's 4 phases. One is to have that general upfront conversation that we've been speaking about, moving from the expected to the unexpected. But then when we come up with a key challenge, so to me, then we identify what the challenge or the problem is, and the impact of that. So that's phase 1. So let's really get clear about that. And we're making sure that we're working on the right problem. You know, I had a dental practice come to me and ask me, well, how do I offer equity to retain my dental practitioners? Because there's such a high demand for dental practitioners in Australia at the moment. We just can't find people. So we need to look at a retention strategy. So I want to offer them equity. And I'm saying, oh, wait a minute, what's the problem? Is it designing an equity system, or is it finding and retaining dentists? And he said, oh, it's finding and retaining dentists. So so he was coming to me with a solution that was masquerading as a problem. How do I offer equity to potential dentists? And I said, that's not the problem. That's one of the solutions. There are other solutions. When would you be offering equity? Oh, 5 years down the track. So I said, so you're going to have a shortage of dentists for the next 5 years. You know, it's not the solution. It's not the problem. The problem is, how do I attract and retain dentists, if that makes sense? So step 1 to me is get a really clear handle that we're working on the right problem and the impact that problem is having, right? Step 2 then is to say, let's cut off the options. So we then talk to the client about, if you did nothing, what would happen? What would be the consequences of that? What would it cost the business? So what we're doing there, because there's always an option. If it gets too hard for the client, they'll do nothing. So what I want to do there is to cut off that option. If it is a realistic option to do nothing, well, then I've got to recognize that that's competition to what I'm offering. So, but I want to cut that off if I can, or at least understand. And then the second part of that is then to say, well, what would the benefits be if you did this properly? Let's look at quantifying. So we're quantifying the cost of not doing it, and we're quantifying the benefits of doing it. And this gets back to your point earlier, Paul, when you talk about pricing. You know, unless you've got really clear quantity, I might think it's $1 million job as your advisor. You think it's $100,000 job. So we will have a completely different pricing on that. You know, I'm going to say $1 million benefit and $100,000 benefit. It's a completely different pricing. So we've got to be very clear jointly on what that benefit is. And if we can't reach that understanding, and then is there any point in going ahead? So I'd be then at the second stage is working out the cost of not doing it and the benefit of doing it. And then in the third and final stage, which is the closing stage to me, is to then say, let's talk about how we might now, the client is now hooked. They're now realizing that they must do it because the option of doing nothing is not going to work. And the benefits of doing it is so great. So we're now overcoming fee resistance because they're now focused on the benefits, not so much on the cost. Then I would sit down with them and we would co-create the next move, the next steps that we need to go. And that would be my close. So here's the next steps. Here's the steps that we need to work through. The client basically signs off on them. And then all I've got to do then is provide a proposal that costs out those steps. And I would generally, always give them 3 options. Never just come back with one. I won't go into that now, but that's absolutely crucial.
And I think he just hit an important point, because knowing that my friends that are in business, they're usually in business with their wives as well. It's probably fair to say. So I think there could be a lot of tension, let's say, in the household if there's cash flow problems. And sometimes, the husband's scared to tell the wife, or the wife's not aware of it, or she doesn't fully understand it, and it's causing marital issues. Therefore, it's causing family issues. And I think your point there of the benefit of what does it look like if we do this? And at the end of the day, I think most people, there was a survey done a few years, most people just want to be happy.
Yeah.
So no one wants to have that constant unhappiness or tension, or we all know, we've all been through those sorts of toxic type of relationships. So you don't want that. So again, that's a great question to ask, because therefore it might uncover some stuff that they need to talk about themselves as well. Of what could our marriage look like if we didn't have that?
And getting back to my previous comment before, that's what they're actually buying. They're buying their better off self. They're buying themselves when this problem has gone. What do you look like when this problem, I've got a better marriage, I've got this, okay, quantify that. What would that mean to you? Yeah. Oh, gee, that's off the scale. That's fantastic. Now, my fee looks rather incidental compared to that, right? If that benefit hasn't been enunciated, then, we always talk about cost benefit. But if you haven't enunciated clearly what the benefit is, the only thing the client has to focus on is the cost.
The cost.
Always going to look expensive.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And then just painting that picture, it's a bit like sort of one of the guys I spoke to, could have even been last week actually, with regards to call it the dream, call it the goal, call it the, people can't even nowadays even have a family holiday. How good would it be to take away the kids and go away on a family holiday for 3 weeks out of the business? What would that do for your family?
Right.
It's pretty important, isn't it?
So, when you've got to that point, it's because you've had a really good conversation and you've drilled down and you've uncovered it. And this is where you're getting into a little bit of psychology. You're having a mix of conversation between the emotion behind what they're trying to achieve by being a business, as opposed to the nuts and bolts and the numbers. So it could be that, I want to extract myself out of the business and only work in it 3 days a week. Well, why do you want to do that for? What's driving that motivation? So I just feel like I need to spend more time with the family. Okay, so spending more time with the family, extracting yourself out of the business, only spending 3 days a week in that business. And what else do you hope to achieve? And you start building on this, and then the close basically comes. So what I'm hearing is, you want to step away from your business, so you need to have systems and processes, but really you want to spend more time with your family. So would it be unreasonable for us to, spend some time together? And you could start talking about, costs at that stage. Would it be unreasonable for us to invest X amount to get you to that position? You're having that mixture of, as I say, the emotional and logic conversation. And I think that's what Warwick's saying. So you'll know when you get there. The selling bits that really, getting the commitment from the client's really easy if the conversation was done properly, I think. It's not a sell at all. When the client says, yep, that's exactly what I want, you can charge whatever you want to charge.
Yeah.
And it might sound strange, but the accounting clients that I've worked with have been dumbstruck by how little fee resistance they actually get when they start effectively, as Eddie said. If you're effectively having the right conversation, the fee resistance just dissipates. The fee resistance is a sign that you're not having the right conversation.
Right.
Interesting. And I think, this is the benefit, I suppose, of us continually bringing this to the forefront and continually talking about it, because this is the value that we want to provide the industry. Because what does the accounting industry look like at the end of the day? So I've got a few pop-ups coming up here, but what does the accounting industry look like if we can get this right? because to be fair, the Pareto, the 80-20 rule will probably come into it, and 20% are probably doing it right. With some tweaking can be done right, but the 80% are not even doing it because it's usually one factor, and we probably know it. They'll probably say, I don't have the time. Usually that's the greatest pushback, I don't have the time. So, what does this look like if we get this right? Phenomenal.
Yeah, it's actually, I'd say it's the reverse of what you've got at the moment. You'll be doing a lot more advisory, and you'll be selling down the accounting piece. You're saying, yeah, look, the number's fine. You probably need to have a cash flow done. So let's get the accountants to knock out a cash flow, and we're going to have a conversation about the impacts. So it's actually going to be quite the reverse. And you'll see that with the software companies coming along and they're gathering data, and they're going to be providing useful data back to what I call accounting advisory piece, back to the clients. That'll be just at a push of a button. And that market is slowly dissipating from the accountants. It's really this next level of advisory that you need to be on. And I just see it over time reversing quite significantly. Oh, we'll get the tax done. Don't worry about that. And the fee will be much more up at the advisory piece. And there'll be absolutely no value in getting the numbers out and lodging a tax return.
And Paul, picking up the point that I don't have the time for this, I then question, what's your business model? I mean, you don't have the time to provide the service to your clients, especially your best clients. Is that what you're telling me? Because if they need it, where are they going to go? And if you're not going to do it, get out of the way of the people that are doing it, because, you've got to think about the practice that you want. And this applies to a number of my clients, are sole practitioners. They're quite small practices. This is not something, referring back to the comments earlier, that it's not necessarily about building a division. It's about building a better service to service your clients. And the sorts of conversations that Eddie and I are talking about could apply to every single client. When you buy software, there's only certain clients that can actually get value from that software, right? Small percentage, probably your 20% of your best clients. So immediately 80% of your clients you've got no traction with, because this particular application. But the conversations that Eddie and I are talking with, if you choose, you could have it with an individual tax return client if you wanted to. Not that you want to, but it applies to all clients of any size, and it applies to practices of any size. It doesn't, and because you're having the meeting next week. So when you say, I don't have the time, well, you're meeting with the client already. You're actually consuming the time already. It's just a question of what conversation are you going to have. You're either going to, in my terms, you're either going to have a profitable conversation, or you're going to have an unprofitable conversation. That's your choice. But I don't know why you would have an unprofitable conversation. Why wouldn't you make it as profitable as you can?
That's a good point. And I think the one thing that always springs to mind is, in that time allocation for the meeting, allow yourself more time as well. So don't go 25 minutes or half an hour back to back to back to back, because you're not going to allow yourself that time. So give yourself more time then to have that, call it the unexpected, which sort of Warwick brought up before, have that unexpected conversation. So, gentlemen,
I think accountants should be taking a lot of pressure off themselves, have no expectations, and just lead conversations and just see what flows from it. What do you got to lose? They've got to come back and do their compliance anyway. You just just put away an hour of your time, but you're exploring this concept of an evolving workspace. And
there is a skill in doing that, isn't there? There's a skill in doing that, and you've got to lay to rest your old habits that actually get in the way of stopping you from doing that. And there are a few different levels, but it's really, there is a skill and a comfort factor in being able to have those conversations.
That's a good point, guys. We've gone over I can't believe we've gone over the hour mark, but quite amazing. So again, quite easy, as you can probably just tell, the easy conversations that we've had, and suddenly, bang, we're over an hour. So great parting comments, which is fantastic there. So Eddie, Warwick, where do people find you if they want to find you and reach out and have those chats with you? Where do they find you guys?
Well, I'm on the World Wide Web just like everyone else, and theeddiesenatore.com, and my numbers. You can reach me through Paul, and more than happy to have the conversation.
Yes. I mean, I'm obviously on LinkedIn. and also profitableconversations.com.au. Both spots can find me, but yeah, probably on LinkedIn is probably as good as any, but also via you, Paul, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And please reach out to me as well. Both the guys are on LinkedIn. So sometimes it's easy just to, whether you're connecting or whether you're sending a message or whatever it may be. So if you're listening to this and you've had the opportunity to go back, sit with your team, and this is the great conversation started with this as well. Sit with your team members. Who are the client-facing team members that also need to hear what we've just been talking about for the last 60 minutes or so? And I'm sure you've all got them. So, and again, whether it's the next layer coming through, who else is going to be client-facing in the next financial year? Who's new to your team that could deal with this sort of level of conversation that maybe you're not having? That's what this is about. So hopefully, again, we've been able to provide you with some thought-provoking ideas that you can take into the new financial year. And Warwick, Eddie, thank you for joining us. It's been refreshing to have you both again joining us in 2022 and just sharing your intellectual property. I think that's the critical factor. You've done this for a number of years. You're doing it for clients. You've both done it for accounting firms. And look, I just want to say thank you for joining us and again, giving up your time to share your experience. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
To all of you listening, just make sure you're continually reaching out, continually learning, and hopefully using these structures to be able to do that. So thanks for joining us today.